G'day everyone, I'm Smokescreen and welcome back to another video, and here we go with another competition that is in Gran Turismo Sport Mode at the moment, in addition to FIA Nations Cup and FIA Manufacturers Series. It's the Toyota Gazoo Racing GT Cup for 2021. Now you might remember the Toyota GR Supra Cup from the last 2 years it's run, in 2020 and 2019. This series is an evolution of that. So what they've done this time is they've called it the GR GT Cup, and you actually use a different Toyota car for every round of the season. So the first round here it happens to be the Toyota GR Supra, the 2020 model, around Laguna Seca, but we're going to go out for our qualifying time here. Well, it's actually WeatherTech Raceway, Laguna Seca. I'm probably legally obliged to say that. But we go out for the qualifying. Coming down into turn 2 it is, the Andretti hairpin. We actually run too deep. So I immediately bin that off and go out for another qualifying time. There's a 5-minute session here, so you do have enough time to go back to the pits if you mess up your lap. But unfortunately on the second time, I just cut turn 6 too much to get a penalty, and that puts me on the edge. I've got 1 minute and 46 seconds remaining to get for my outlap again, although it's going to be 1 minute and 40 seconds by the time I'm released for the pits. But we're going to fast forward all the way through here. There's a couple of cars that go ahead continuing their runs, and you can see the time is getting very, very marginal. 40 seconds as we go through turn 6. We've got the entire final sector to do with only 26 seconds to go. Coming through the second to last turn and the final turn, we've only got 5 seconds to go, and we've run out of time. It's about 3 seconds short. So I don't get a qualifying time in. Oh man. So we're off to a fantastic start here at the back of the grid. Obviously not ideal. Right, so I guess next port of call here is the standing start we have for this race here. I think it's probably going to be a standing start for all of the rounds, but it is definitely, at least for this first round here, a standing start. The process is traction control 1, handbrake and second gear, to wait for the 5 lights to go out and then release and turn off your traction control just before you shift up to third gear. Right, so we're at the back of the field, so we can only go forwards. We've got car number 15, so we only have to gain a couple of positions, but we're just going to watch the action here from behind. A couple of people ran wide down the main straight towards that first hairpin there. We've got someone on our right hand side who has the inside for turn 3. It's going to be very difficult to go around the outside with our very cold sports hard tyres at this point here. As you get the underlap on one of the cars and another overlap on the second car, up into 16th momentarily, but the guy behind us, SR Brian, he performs a lovely undercut through the corner, or switchback, cutback is the word I'm looking for. Performs a lovely cutback through turn 4. So we find ourselves up into 17th. That's a gain of 1 position. Now, it's very difficult at the start of the race, especially at the back. Everyone's on sports hard tyres, which offer a very significant grip disadvantage compared to the sports soft tyres, which we all qualify on. So people aren't used to the sports hard tyres, and then in addition, the sports hard tyres are also very cold, so they offer even less grip than you than they would if you were doing, for example, time trial practice on sports hard tyres. So coming through Rainy Curve, it's turn 10, as in the 10th turn, but I think it's officially called turn 9 because the corkscrew is like turn 9 and then turn 9A or some ridiculous stuff like that. A couple of people on the radar peel off into the pit lane. So 1 lap on the sports hard tyres, that's not exactly the ideal strategy. So I guess we can talk about the strategy at this point here, but not before we go down the main straight. So remember that action from the first lap there? It's actually knocked out one of the brake boards, and I didn't realise it, so I'm looking at the number 3 board thinking that that was my correct brake reference, and I go way too deep. But I could tell you when I did the race, I was like, geez, these bloody sports hard tyres don't have any grip, do they? But it was actually my next tour around the circuit, so braking into the hairpin of lap 3, I realised, oh wait, the first board's been knocked out. So that is not great, because it's very difficult to pick out another marker on the go in a race, because you don't really have any margin for error. But the strategy. Let's go to the strategy. So there's 3 compounds of tyres available. We're using the sports category of tyres, so they don't offer as much grip as the racing tyres, but they're basically a more performance enhanced road car tyre basically. So it's pretty good for this car. This car feels pretty good on sports tyres. So there's hard, medium and soft as there are with the racing tyre compounds, although there's no sports super soft. That would be a bit weird if someone bins it. But only the sports hard tyres are the mandatory tyre, so as long as you use the sports hard tyres for at least 1 lap, you're all good. Now, I thought it was going to be like a no stop on sports hard, but I was wrong. It's actually a 1 stop, so hard tyres for about 4 to 6 laps, and then the soft tyres for the remainder. You can either start on the sports soft or the hard, depending on how far up or down the field you start. We try to attempt to go 3 wide through that final corner. It doesn't quite work. I thought I could be a bit of a hero and try and get 2 positions in 1 corner, but I ended up 3rd best in this particular instance here. Ledge 2nd best, and GT Sport penalty comes out on top. So coming in towards turn 1, we've basically got no brake reference. So I'm just braking nice and early. Ledge doesn't in this particular case. He goes deep. That is because that brake board has been wiped out. And we gain that position up into 14th, and we come around this tour of the course this time. A couple of people in the pits up into 12th, and then we get to lap 6, so we've got to do 6 laps on the sports hard tyres and do the remainder on the sports soft. So sports medium you don't use, and I think that is okay in this case. They could have done all 3 tyres mandatory, and that would have put everyone on a 2-stop strategy. But I reckon you don't use your tyres down to their last ounce of grip in that particular instance. So I reckon it tests drivers more to leave this race as a 1-stop. So basically you wear down your sports soft tyres as far as they'll go comfortably, and then the rest on the sports hard tyres, which don't offer much grip in the first place. Coming out of the pits, we were actually in last, but then Schnickerman up ahead, or someone went into the pits, we're up into 17th, but then Schnickerman up ahead went wide on the exit of turn 6, and that just puts him in between myself and Atom. And then you can see ahead, Atom makes a mistake here, goes very wide, and then ends up off the circuit on the outside of turn 11, and we get up into 16th. We're just in the slipstream of Schnickerman at this point as he runs deep into the final corner, and I get a lovely straight exit there, and I just get the power down. Beautiful amount of grip there, provided by the sports soft tyres, which we have now switched over to after our pit stop, and we managed to get the launch down the straight, and that is going to be good. And there was a brake reference I finally picked out. It's not as good as the number 4 board, but it was basically a lighter piece of tarmac going across the road. I was braking just before then, and that got me into the corner nicely. A couple more people going to the pits. It just takes a little bit for these positions to equalise, but eventually we're up into 14th from 15th, so we gained a position from at least 1 person in the pits. And this is where this race takes an exciting turn. So Iron Mask up ahead has a penalty, and that just puts him into the clutches of Tazar, who we've been slowly catching throughout the course of our soft tyre stint. So Iron Mask has now dropped back into a striking distance, into the striking distance of Tazar, and that's just going to bring me closer as well. As the 2 up ahead begin to fight, you can see Tazar switching all over the place. That's just going to slow them up enough for me to get a little bit closer to them, so I could potentially have 2 positions here. And we're going to follow this battle for a little bit. Tazar goes down the inside as a corkscrew, around the outside of Rainy Curve, and gets that position back up from Iron Mask, who takes a little bit of a narrow line into Rainy Curve. So I get a little bit closer to Iron Mask at this point, get through the second to last corner nicely. Don't run onto the gravel on the exit, it slows you up too much. And then coming into the final corner, I thought I was going to run into the back of Iron Mask then, but thankfully I would imagine he probably feathered the brakes a little bit, having broken early. But we go down the main straight, we've got the slipstream, it's set to real, so it's the normal slipstream you'd expect. However, these road cars, they don't have as much aero as the sort of race cars, so the slipstream is not as strong. Basically, slipstream works in race cars so well is because they have all these wings and winglets and splitters and diffusers. They got all this downforce work done to the bodywork of the car. It basically acts as drag in a straight line, so that's why the air really hampers a race car. So when it ducks into the slipstream, the difference between air and no air in a race car is way more pronounced than in a road car. So for that reason as well, the dirty air is not as bad as well, which is why it's so easy to follow other people within the slipstream. We're so close to Iron Mask here. He runs defensive up into turn 5, so we were basically less than 2/10 behind, and we still had basically as much grip as we had on our own. So it's a nice, refreshing change, I would say, racing road cars for a change. We really don't race the road cars that often. So I think the GR GT Cup from Toyota here in the game, Iron Mask actually runs very deep into the corkscrew. I was trying to work out whether I tapped him a little bit. I don't think I did, and he just ran deep, but we managed to go around the outside, or we're side by side through Rainy Curve this time, but that just translates to the inside. For the second to last corner, he managed to get that position up, and we're now firmly behind PX7 Tazar. Now, what I was saying before, the Toyota GR GT Cup here gives us a good opportunity to race road cars, and in fact most of the rounds are done in road cars, bar 2. We use the Super Formula Toyota and the GR Supra Racing concept for 2 of the rounds. The rest are done in road cars, so it's a nice change. Most of the cars in GT Sport are indeed road cars, so actually being given the opportunity to race them doesn't come up too often apart from the daily races, and they're not as competitive. So it's nice to be in a nice competitive championship here in road cars, and it's definitely requires a lot more practice. I practiced for several hours to get up to the pace here, and I eventually did. I actually got into the top 10 with a 1:33.2 time trial time. I think that put me 8th or 9th on the top 10 leaderboard, so I was happy with that. But we ran side by side with Tazar through that sort of turn 3, turn 4, that infield section, I guess you could call it, of this lap here, and it just puts me off the back of Tazar, who managed to get a much better run out of that sort of complex there. So coming through turn 6, turn 9 is way up the road. In the slipstream of Tazar at this point, we're going to try and not run into the back of him because we've only got 1 and a bit laps to go, so we're getting very close to striking opportunity, and he actually runs very deep into the corkscrew, so that just puts us right onto the back of Tazar. Let's try and get a good run through Rainy Curve, dab of the brakes to get it rotated, and then onto the power on the exit, and that gap on the inside just opens up, and I send it down the inside and get it stopped beautifully on the apex, although I am slightly slow on the exit, but I have the inside for the final corner. Tazar almost has the run round the outside, but I managed to just stop it on the apex absolutely beautifully, and just because I've got that narrower line, I managed to get a better run off the corner, and that was the race. I came home in 12th. So if you do remember, I did start at the back, so I gained a good handful of positions, 6 positions or something there. So I think that was a pretty decent race, and I actually caught up to Tazar and Iron Mask, who began fighting, so I was on the pace. I was definitely worthy of being further up the field, raising 7 positions. Sorry, my very on-the-whim mathematics is very poor, I would say. 172 points. But I did go again. I knew I had to go again because I wrecked my qualifying. I knew I could be a lot further up and be in contention for a lot higher points if I was further up the grid. And this is the next slot. So there's 2 slots for each round here. One at 7 o'clock at night, one at 8:30, so not too late. But if you have a look in this split here, I've gone again, and my number of points, 172. It's the highest number of points of this split. So it just goes to show that I was definitely the most ambitious of the bunch here. A lot of people coming in for the first time, McEwen and Banana Josh there with 0 points apiece, having obviously disconnected or quit from their previous slot or come last in the final split, I suppose. But we come out for the qualifying time. This was my Achilles heel last time. Let's have another go, and I think this time we actually do manage to get a qualifying time on the board as we come through the final corner. It's going to be a good opportunity here to show you my qualifying time and go through a little bit of a lap guide of this Toyota GR Supra RZ 2020 model at Laguna Seca. Turn 1 easily flat. Turn 2 we're looking for the number 4 board, which is thankfully present here. So we managed to get on the brakes nicely. 4th gear and then a late downshift to 3rd just before the rotation phase of the Andretti hairpin. Onto the power on the exit, and then for turn 3 it's the number 2 board just before 4th gear. The key to this car is no trail braking. Don't trail brake, it just pushes the car wide. So off the brakes and then on the brakes again on the specific black obvious tyre mark on the racing line. Just before then, 5th gear through turn 4, and then coming up towards turn 5, we're just braking just on the shadow sent by the mother sort of gantry over the top of the track. 4th gear through there, no trail braking, just let the car rotate. Coming up towards turn 6, just before the number 2 board, just down into 5th, get it into that groove of the apex of turn 6 and don't run into the gravel on the exit. Coming up the Rahal straight towards the corkscrew, look on the right hand side, the number 4 board, just after the number 4 board, and 4th gear, get it turned, and then just 50% throttle down the corkscrew. The car's very unsettled, and then just on the start of the curb on the right, lift off, upshift into 5th, and then onto the power on the apex, and then coming into the second to last, just before the number 2 board, just get it rotated, power on the apex, don't run too wide, we do a little bit there, but it's not to worry, and final corner is just before the number 3 board, get it turned, 3rd gear, just run slightly wide, probably braking a little bit too late. Basically, that was probably the difference between maybe 1 or 2 meters too late. But coming up towards the line, a 1:34.0, it's actually a decent time. I definitely felt I could get into the 33s in qualifying, but we manage a 34.0, which is actually alright. And we'll see where that puts us on this grid here. Here we go, we've got a group of cars behind us. We're fairly far up. I think it's 4th. Qualifying 4th. Not bad. So let's try and get a good launch off the start. We have the inside for turn 2, so we could potentially get a move on Schnickerman or Metal Gear if they both run wide. Once again, 2nd gear launch, traction control 1 and handbrake, and then switch off the traction control just before we shift to 3rd. Change that brake balance to 0s. We're starting on the sport soft tyres, and then coming into turn 2 on the brakes nicely, and Schnickerman indeed actually does brake it very early, and that move is done before we even reach the corner. We're side by side with Metal Gear at this point, and it was here I decided no, Metal Gear is always, any day of the week, going to drive away from me. There's no point holding him up. He obviously wants to contend for the race victory, so I'm not going to interfere with that. But coming through the opening lap, I'm in 3rd. Like, I'm 3rd behind Metal Gear and McEwen. So these two players are basically FIA World Tour finalists, World Tour contenders. So these are some of the fastest people in the region, and I'm in 3rd, just behind them. And we'll see, you know, you probably expect them to drive away straight away, but I have the slipstream at this point, and I'm slowly opening that gap up from Iron Mask. So as long as I keep the slipstream of Metal Gear, I could potentially sort of hang with these two at the front of the field, and that would be a very, very solid opportunity here. Although coming through this corner here, we are slightly wide, and that gap to Metal Gear just opens up to over 4/10, so I think I'm beginning to see at this point, I don't think I'm going to be able to hold them, because you can see that gap between McEwen and Metal Gear is remaining the same, but the gap between Metal Gear and me is opening up slowly. And then heading out of the final corner, kick of oversteer on the exit. That's the thing with this car, massive oversteer, this car here. It's got 8 gears as well, so all the gears are really quite short, which is why we can launch in 2nd. And it just means that power delivery is very pronounced. It's very strong and very immediate power delivery of the Supra, so that is definitely something we have to try and keep under control. But coming into the 2nd lap, the gap is just opening up to Metal Gear at this point. So I think they're going to break away, which is to be expected, to be honest, but I've now broken the slipstream to Schnickerman behind, who has overtaken Iron Mask for 4th position. And now I was just thinking about what I can do in terms of my tyres. So we saw in the previous race, you run the soft tyres into the ground before switching over to hard tyres, or vice versa I suppose, work out how long the soft tyres last and then start on the hards and do the number of remaining laps on the hards. So what I decided to do is basically go hell for leather for 3rd, because I could see at this point the pair up ahead are breaking away. Actually, they have broken slipstream at this point, but I think I'll claw my way back in it, having gotten a good corkscrew on that particular tour of Laguna Seca. Get a nice run, but you can see they've just opened it up, so I'm basically teetering on the edge. But what I was deciding at this point, I was like, you know what, screw the tyre saving, let's just go all out. My brake balance is at 0, so I don't want any more rearward bias on this car. This car is already very rear biased in terms of the way it handles. The rear end likes to swing a lot, so I don't want to add any more forces into the back of the car, so brake balance 0 is as far back as I'm going to go. As soon as you switch it to +1, so you've got more brake going to the rear of the car than the front, the rear just likes to turn itself on the entry to corners as you're coming off the brake. So I don't want to do that. 0 brake balance is where I was, so my tyres are going to be going down at this point. And I was cruising along nicely until lap 6, where I just dipped my rear right tyre into the gravel trap on the exit of turn 6, and it's just put Ironmasker's re-overtaken Schnickerman for 4th position, firmly behind, and I run deep into the corkscrew as well, so I was obviously overcompensating for my lack of speed up that straight there, and Ironmasker's just got the overlap on the exit of Rainy Curve there, and he's on my right hand side. He's going to be able to sweep in ahead. I don't want to make any contact with him. Very borderline, very close racing between the pair of us there. Absolutely beautiful, and he's actually got the inside for the final corner. Gives me a little tap just to say you're staying to the outside, and I am taking the inside. Fair enough in my books. And we've lost our 3rd position, so I was quite frustrated with myself. Have a look at my lap times there. Consistent 135s and then a 137.4, so a couple of mistakes creeping in as Ironmask runs very narrow and very deep into the turn 2 hairpin there, and he just manages to stick it on my right hand side, so I've got to leave him the space. He's going to have the inside for the following 2 corners, so it's going to be very difficult to defend this position as we run side by side up into turn 3, and he gets that move done. Not traditionally an overtaking corner, but he was already completely alongside, so he was able to complete that move on that corner. And this fighting has just brought Schnickerman behind. He's under 2 tenths behind, so at this point I was beginning to worry. I was like, well, I could just as easily finish 5th as I will finish 3rd. So I'm basically doing everything I can to avoid the mistakes, going as fast as possible, as fast as I can, and just trying to overtake Ironmask, who does the same mistake as me, and I managed to just nip up the outside, I guess, or the inside, I don't know, his left-hand side, and Schnickerman overtakes Ironmask as well, so he's copying me. As we receive a tap into the corkscrew, I managed to just keep it within track limits. That was Ironmask obviously doing the same thing, misjudging his braking. And have a look behind this, side by side through Rainy Curve on the exit here, that gap just opens up 5 tenths, 6 tenths, 7 tenths, so I've almost broken slipstream. 8 tenths on the exit of turn 11. Coming into the final corner, I'm just teetering on the edge of slipstream. 8 tenths on the exit, 9 tenths, it's just at about 9.5 tenths. So I'm back up into 3rd, and I was still, once again, cruising along nicely up until turn 6 again. Let's see what happens this time as you hit that curb, and I just, oh my goodness, that oversteer was, oh man, the car is just deadly. So that was definitely a more enunciated reaction of what can happen if you dip one wheel into the gravel on the exit of turn 6. You can see just how easily the car can just spear off to the left. So we managed to just save that, but that just puts Schnickerman within slipstream, and he managed to stay in the slipstream actually. So once he had that slipstream, that just brought up his pace just enough to keep onto the back of me, and for the first time on lap 10 that gap goes below 3 tenths, and he kind of looks for the move on the inside of turn 4. It gets a little bit of a poorer exit compared to me, but that gap is definitely under 3 tenths at this point. So I'm beginning to worry. I've not tyre saved pretty much at all. I've just gone hell for leather, basically doing everything I can to remain in 3rd, because I know that I can get 3rd in this race, and that is what I want. I need the podium, and that would be a very good result for me. So I have not tyre saved, just trying to keep my pace up as much as possible. And unfortunately at this point I'm on lap 10, so I want to stretch my soft tyres to 12 laps. That leaves only 6 laps to do on the Sports Hard, and I've got 2 laps to go on this stint, and my tyre wear, especially on that front right tyre, has gone to about 50%. The rear left tyre is only at about 80. No, only about 20% tyre wear rather, 80% still good. But you can see my tyres are dropping off, and I think Schnickerman is tyre saving a lot, and has been tyre saving a lot, so his tyres are probably in a little bit of a more favourable position compared to mine. Just coming down in towards turn 2, you can see just how much the car pushes wide. Schnickerman is right on my rear left quarter panel there, and he's really looking really racy, so I'm on the back foot at this point. I've got 2 laps to hold him off, and that's exactly what I'm going to do. So I'm going to be defending my position because I want him to stay behind me. I want to come out ahead after my pit stop. So we'll see how that works out, because I feel as though if I come out ahead on a fresh set of tyres, given they're the Sports Hard, but Schnickerman will be on the Sports Hard as well after his pit stop, I reckon I can keep pace. I reckon I can keep him behind. But I reckon if he's released from behind me, so if he manages to get past, still with about 1.5 laps to go before the pit stop, I definitely think he'll streak out a bit of a gap, having those better tyres compared to me at this point in the race. And I'm afraid that if he does get ahead and drives into the distance a little bit just before we take our pit stops, I reckon he'll just be able to come out ahead of me. And because our pace is so similar, I reckon I'd struggle to re-overtake him for third. So I know the course of my race, or the final result, is really hangs in the balance. It's really dependent on this point in the race. As Metal Gear goes in, 51% of fuel, so fuel is no worries in this race, of course. We're definitely very much so past halfway, and Metal Gear still has over half a tank. So fuel's not a worry, it's definitely just a tyre race, but we've got 1 lap to go, so we're coming on the finish of lap 11 and starting lap 12, which is going to be my final lap on the sports soft tyres rather, although my pace has dropped off massively, a 137.2 being set on lap 11 as we run very deep into the hairpin. Schnickerman gets the overlap, but he's going to be on the outside for turn 3, so we saw what happened with myself and Iron Mask earlier in the race. He was able to keep the position, having the inside for turn 3, and I've managed to do exactly that, although Schnickerman backed out of it a little bit more than I did when Iron Mask was on my inside. Coming through turn 5, well that's turn 4, sorry, we get a little bit of a gap. It's just about 2.5 tenths at this point. They're coming in towards turn 4. He was looking racy again. He just looks for that move, but I just meet the apex early enough for him to run into the back of me, so very good defensive driving if I do say so myself. But then this corner here is where the race can easily unravel as you run very wide there. Schnickerman does the same thing, and he just has my slipstream, and there is a move to be done in the braking zone towards the corkscrew. But he does not go for it at this point, not quite close enough. But we cut that corner nicely, There's a penalty if you do not keep at least one wheel on the red and white curb, so we do have to be careful of that. But we managed to successfully navigate the corkscrew on the final lap of our very worn tyres here. I'll whack on the left indicator just to tell him I'm going into the pits, because I would probably suggest he was quite annoyed being held up behind me for so long. But he stays out, so I'd imagine he's trying to split the strategy. He doesn't want to come in behind me and therefore cement himself behind me, because there's no fuel to differentiate. It's just the tyres, which take the same amount of time for every car. So he's trying to split the strategy and get a faster in-lap, out-lap compared to me, and hopefully that will translate to a overcut for Schnickerman, which I definitely think is possible at this point. Just because he was looking very racy, I definitely think he's got a pace advantage on the worn tyres compared to me on my worn tyres. So it was definitely a very real risk of the overcut happening. So we're going to our soft tyres. I don't have to make the soft tyres last as long as I do on the soft tyres. Sorry, I've gone on the hard tyres, and I don't have to make them last as long as the soft tyres. Is that what I said? I don't know. But anyway, you know what I'm saying. So I move the brake balance forward just to get that extra bite under braking. So obviously any forward brake balance is going to wear out your front tyres a lot more. But just because these tyres don't have to last as long, I can afford that little bit of extra front tyre wear. And I reckon that trade-off between tyre wear and extra braking capability leans more towards having the extra braking on this on the hard tyres, sorry. So Schnickerman's in the pits along with a very large group of other cars, GT Sport Penalty and Bob Sport, also in the pits. I'm going to overtake GT Sport Penalty and Bob Sport, but Schnickerman was right behind me as we entered the pits. So that is definitely going to be a big question mark as to whether I can stay ahead. But coming down the main straight, he's going to be finishing up his pit stop at this point, and there he is, the exit of the pit lane. He's got all of the pit lane to traverse as well as the hairpin just before he re-enters onto the track. But we managed to get that move done down into the hairpin, but we've got a much wider line to travel than he does on the inside of the corner, of course, on the pit exit. And there he is on the radar. He's just behind. Now, it's going to be crucial to see if he can remain in slipstream. It's going to be very difficult for him, of course, because I've got 1 lap more tyre wear on my hard tyres than he does, but he's also got to traverse sort of the first half of his stint on very cold hard tyres. So I reckon that grip advantage probably leans more towards me. Even though I've got 1 lap of tyre wear, he's got the cold tyres, and you can see that just puts him out of slipstream. Coming up towards turn 4, look at that, it's over 8 tenths. and that was the race. I managed to hold him off. Managed to hold him off for third. I got myself a podium, only 6.7 seconds behind Metal Gear. That could be a lot worse. That gap could have been a lot bigger. So what's that? 6 seconds. That's less than half a second a lap that I was down on pace compared to Metal Gear. And if you consider those 2 laps in the middle of my soft tyre stint being 137s where they should have been 135s, I definitely think we could have been a lot closer to Metal Gear. Look at that. 3rd place, clean race, 234 points. I reckon that's a success for me. I'm really happy with that. I was very, very happy to bring home that podium, and I'm so glad I did the 2nd slot and went again, just having redeemed myself from absolutely bottling my qualifying in the previous race. So, that's the Toyota GR GT Cup. There's 7 rounds of the championship. The next one, I don't quite remember off the top of my head. No, I do. It's the GR Yaris at Fuji. So, if you remember, we had that combination in the Nations Cup from the exhibition series just gone. So, I don't quite know if the multipliers are the same, but I did alright in that round. So, let's hope we can carry that over to round 2. So, all in all, I'm quietly surprised at how good that racing actually was. I reckon that the slower road cars can definitely bring closer racing, and I was very happy to be fighting up the front of the pack. There's good racing to be had, and I'm very excited to continue this series along with Nations Cup and the Manufacturers Series. But that's going to round out this one today, so do hit that like button if you enjoyed, and do subscribe. If you'd like to see more videos from me, do leave a comment as well. Questions, comments, constructive criticism as always, very much appreciated. But that's going to be the end of this one today, and that means that is it for me. So once again, I do thank you very much for watching. See you later.